Mavis originated as a model on Wilbert Awdry's original Farker layout, nearly a decade before her debut in the Railway series books. She is based on the Class 04 diesels that took over work on the Wisbech and Upwell tramway from Toby's basis, with cowcatchers and side plates as mandated by the Board of Trade. How one of these engines wound up in industrial use on Sodor in the 60s is beyond me. But if nothing else, I do like to think that Mavis was not one of the 04s originally assigned to the Wisbech and Upwell line. Despite not being an NWR locomotive, I do consider Mavis a part of the Farker crew, and had to have her in my collection. I initially planned to complete her after Daisy, but given the amount of trouble the railcar was giving me, I went ahead and got to work on Mavis. This also gave me a good reason to get back to work making trucks, too. Can't have a shunting engine without trucks to shunt, right? Unfortunately, my timeline for her got a little messed up, and she's not fully done. But dang it, she's done enough for a video, and that's good enough for me. The body of my Mavis is a 3D print from Thomas fandom member Sparkshot. He sells it with various configurations depending on the specific locomotive you want to make, and included in that is a specific pack for Mavis. The file was created in 4mm scale for the Bachmann Class 4, but Gavin was gracious enough to scale it down to HO for me upon request. However, this meant that I would have to source a suitable chassis from elsewhere. Remember, 00 and HO use the same gauge of track, but they are different scales, 00 being 4mm to the foot, and HO being 3.5mm to the foot, meaning the Bachmann 04 could not be used. There was, thankfully, an advantage provided by Mavis's side plates. Since that whole area would be covered up, I wouldn't need to worry about representing the 04's jackshaft. In fact, I could have simply found a cheap 040 chassis and popped her onto that. After all, I'm hardly a rivet counter. But I am pedantic, and I wanted to have an 060, though I was unlikely to have the wheelbase correct using an RTR chassis. I had a few ideas, ranging from using a Bachmann Usera or Spectrum 060 to a 6-wheeled variant of the ubiquitous Plymouth shunter, which proved to be a terrible choice as it's basically two big blocks bolted to a massive ringfield drive or pancake motor or whatever the heck this style of motor is called. I'm sure someone will correct my terminology in the comments. Unable to find a satisfactory choice, I elected to hold off on this for a while and focus on other projects. I thought perhaps I would have to make a custom chassis no matter what. I was already planning on doing so for future locomotives, but at the time I started Mavis, I hadn't settled on how. I began sanding down her body and side plates, which also needed some filing to get rid of excess resin and fit properly. The holes for the buffers needed to be slightly drilled out to get them to fit. I did go ahead and glue the side plates on, but I left the cowcatchers off until after I had been able to paint the buffer beam. Now the lack of a chassis was still bugging me even as I continued work on Daisy and Thomas. If only there was a similar locomotive I had on hand which I could experiment with.
Please keep up the toast. Don't turn me into Mavis.
No! I had to cut away a little more metal and turn the motor on its side, but eventually it fit. I would need to find a way to mount the body at the right height, but it fit. I was fine with this arrangement. I never was satisfied with how the Bachmann Toby chassis was so visible inside my own Toby, sticking out into his cabs. I planned to eventually start over from scratch on Toby, making my own body, chassis, and mechanism. But for the time being, he's just gonna have to be content like this. I used bits of styrene to build a mount for the body and glued nuts into place on the body to keep it secure. This was not a mathematical process. I was eyeballing it the whole time. I did find out later during test runs at my train club that the rear does sag a little bit, but I could fix that easily using washers as shims. I think this might be the most actual scratch building I've done in this whole series so far. There was also just enough space in her radiator and cab to add some 1/4 ounce weights. With the body mounted at the height I wanted, I glued the cab and side plates into place and made handrails using Phoenix Precision knobs and music wire. Then I took the assembly and primed it with Tamiya Light Gray. After this, I chose to use Model Master Grimy Black to give her a messier, more work-worn appearance than the more public-facing NWR engines. I painted her radiator and cab rear with Tamiya XF3 Flat Yellow, then applied TS13 Clear Gloss Spray in preparation for the decals I'd be using. The wasp stripes and lettering are waterslide decals from Fox Transfers, and I alternated between the two to break up the tedium. All the lettering is in the Gill Sans font. Unfortunately, each sheet only comes with 2 Qs, and rather embarrassingly, I lost one. Not wanting to buy and wait on yet another sheet, I had an idea. Why not take an O and use an I or a 1 to turn it into a Q?
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
After a coat of matte lacquer came the final phase, weathering. Mavis is, of course, an industrial locomotive working in a quarry, so naturally a lot of dust would build up over time on a quarry engine. I used a soft brush to apply Vallejo light slate gray pigments all around, focusing on her cow catchers and the corners where dust would most likely accumulate. Dark slate pigment was also used more sparingly, along with soot along the center line of the roof. I also used one of Vallejo's Weathering Effects products to add some diesel stains leaking from her vents. Once this was sealed in, I added her couplers. The Hornby screw links I like using fit with just a little bit shaved off their shanks. I also cut some clear plastic for her windows, but I made the mistake of attaching them with super glue instead of PVA. The end results speak for themselves. I decided to use a TCS M4 decoder mounted atop the motor, replacing the old Digitrax decoder Toby had. Unfortunately, she didn't prove to be a great runner when I took her to the club for a running session. She constantly stalled and her cow catchers turned out to be just low enough to catch on some of the scenery. I added a KA2 Stay Alive to keep her going, but I have yet to take her back to the club for a proper running session. This video has been delayed enough as it is, and for all intents and purposes, the model itself is done. So, yeah. That's how Mavis currently stands. Functional, if faceless. I've commissioned faces for her, and they're actually one of the reasons I put off making this video for so long. But given it's been over half a year since I last uploaded, I wisely reconsidered. One of these days I'll have a proper layout of my own to let her stretch her wheels. In the meantime, I'm gonna get back to work on some other projects. Not you.